gentlemen, here is the last explanation from the source material. This one is Selenidad. It was written in 2009, this article. The article is the introduction from a book called Selenidad, Selena, Latinos, and the Performance of Memory. So, just a little bit about Deborah Paredes. Um, she is an American poet, a scholar, and a cultural critic. She is also a professor of creative writing and ethnic studies at Columbia. Um, so when I was thinking about this, I noted that this would definitely fit into the cultural, economic, historical, but also psychological lens. Um, so, um, to start off, I noted this idea regarding the Selena Museum. When you must leave the tourist district along Corpus Christi's bayfront, um, I kind of associated that with being sort of rooted and grounded in authenticity. Um, so the article first starts by talking about the museum itself. And then we get this reference to Selena's purple spangled pantsuit has assumed a life not unlike Elvis's flashy pantsuit. So I noted that the analogy of American music artist nostalgia and Latin American music artist nostalgia. This comparison, um, and especially with a lot of these biopics that have recently come out over the past several years. This idea of an object or a something associated with an artist almost takes on a life of its own, which continues with this idea that we're talking about regarding this sentence right here, larger than life. And this statement, is it Selena crooning her disco medley that I remember? Or is it Jennifer Lopez as Selena? So the question that I thought of was, how is our memory or nostalgia altered when someone or something has been romanticized by the media? Like, what are we focusing on remembering? Are we remembering Selena singing the melody? Or are we focusing on Jennifer Lopez as Selena singing the melody? Which one is it, and does that alter our perception? Um, so then down here, I noted a visible reminder of the critical space created by Selena's absence. Um, and the gaping material in many ways acts as a metaphor for the created process of memory itself, saying, how do we essentially fill in the gaps in our memory? And then it sort of related to this idea of Frida Kahlo's self-portrait with loose hair, um, sold for $1.65 million. Economic forecaster announced that Latin American art has emerged as a solid investment. So this is making that cultural lens and economic lens connect with one another. So those of you that are really interested in art, this might be a connection that you might want to further talk about. Um, and then this idea of in the decade to follow, Frida mania as the cultural and commercial iconization of Kahlo was often referred to in popular accounts. So again, this idea of like commercial iconization, like these people, these artists, actors, actresses, athletes, that sort of thing. Sometimes they are become icons after they die. So, what does that sort of say about human beings and this need um, to associate everything with um, the dead and those memories, and why sometimes artists are larger when they're dead than in popularity than they are when they're alive. And then there's another specific example relating to Latina icons. They gave the example of Evita Peron. Um, Nobody really knew much about um, Evita Peron until Madonna played her in the movie Evita. And it was turned into a musical. Same thing with Selma Hayek in her role as Frida Kahlo. This idea that Latin icons are celebrated more in death than they are in life. So, how does a sense of nostalgia or romanticizing these icons influence the public's memory of them um, and work towards economic gain? So, then they go into here talking about how it relates to fashion icons and commercializations in the garment and cosmetic industries as well. Um, and then um, they talk about the relationship between Selena and um, Frida Kahlo again with the amount of money that things are costing. And then further down, we're talking about the Tejano Music Awards, and they're talking about how it sort of foreshadowed um, this the idea of public, or rather private information being public after someone passes. And the question then comes up with what's more important, ethics or nostalgia, essentially. Um, so then that idea is sort of continued when we're talking on the next page about how Americans were invested emotionally, politically, and financially in the posthumous lives of Selena, Evita, and Frida Kahlo. Um, uh, you can take a look at this from a social, cultural lens, a political, economic, or even a psychological lens. Because there's another reference down here referring to Selena, that her dead body was frequently publicized to delimit or to expand prevailing notions of citizenship and cultural identity. Um, But really, this last sentence down here is focusing on the non white Hispanics that are really increasingly the majority minority group in the U.S. And that vote and getting those people in terms of political and economic force on your side is huge for politics and, essentially the economy, and what sort of impact that has on the larger country as a whole. So then we go into this section, and we're talking here about actual objects that if you pay attention to, if you listen to Bad Bunny's music, Bad Bunny's new album cover sort of has a sense of nostalgia for like the simpler life in Puerto Rico. And what this does is really sort of focuses in on mourning in the Latin population over like the island's gentrification and all of that. So then if you continue in this paragraph, we get to this idea that if memory is both fact and fiction combined at all times, how do we ground ourselves in reality, but also remember that history actually shapes our future? Is this really a question? This question kind of is like, is this why history tends to repeat itself? So then we continue further down to this paragraph that starts with ironically. And we're talking about how, again, Selena was US born. She grew up speaking English. But she historically ignored US born Latinas in favor of like the exotic appeals of foreign born Latin stars. So then what comes to mind is, how does nostalgia switch when you're in between two different cultural identities, right? So how does your memory and how does your nostalgia switch when you're trying to decide, are you American of Latina descent, or are you Latina living in America, or how that ultimately can really relate to like large immigrant groups. And there's this saying from various Native American tribes that they don't like to be referred to as Native Americans because they are not American. They are just native and natives to this area. So they don't like to associate themselves with the American part of Native American. So it would be interesting to sort of look at how other cultures view themselves. So then we get into this statement here about how these communities are yearning to express a collective promise for their own future. So yes, we're talking about Selena here, but this is a larger metaphor for like the American dream. Essentially, this success with cultural respect, cultural acceptance, and being valued. So then we get to this idea on the next page where people have to to decide, are you too Americanized? Are you too Mexican? Like, where's the line? For some people, you might be too Mexican. For other people, you might be too American. So, like, how do you find that? And then, how do you translate that into essentially the arts? Um, okay, so again, we're talking about this idea of, are you so if you don't know, Selena also sort of started this self fashioning idea. Um, and that really sort of continued with artists like Beyonce and Jennifer Lopez when they don't fit the stereotypical mold. So they make their own fashion line or their own clothing to sort of make a statement for themselves. So, how does that sort of translate into cultural identity? How do this idea of like essentially turning themselves into a brand? And we can see that in a lot of popular culture, how now it's not just enough to be a celebrity or an actress or a singer or whatever. You have to be this like gigantic brand. And what that sort of says about who you are and your culture, and where you fit in societal norms. So as we finish up, this statement right here is extremely important, because, again, how is our nostalgia altered when someone has passed or has been romanticized for so long by so many people? And we can always talk about that more if this is a direction that you want to go in. So then we get to this idea here, which might be interesting for some of you. This idea of the double standard of men versus women, male performers versus female performers, white performers versus persons of color performers, BIPOC. Like, does nostalgia just categorize them the same rather than highlight their differences? And again, the last sentence in the article, in the introduction, again focuses on cultural, political, and economic spheres, connecting the cultural memory and the shifting categories of racial, gendered identifications at the dawn of the 21st century. So these three lenses, it's focusing on how they are shifting and shaping cultural memory, and how that can greatly influence power structures. So going back to that political element with the Latino vote, a lot of what Barack Obama focused on in his initial election was targeting the younger generation and targeting the Latino and African American vote, and what he did in turn, because now there's this gigantic shift in identification, both racially, gender, associated with gender, and culturally. So, again, if you are going to take a look at this, you can also use the end notes to kind of give you a little bit more information about backgrounds, but maybe even just sort of looking at some of the notes and trying to find those articles to further help you. So if you have any questions, as always, let me know.